The ground ball was hit sharply toward first base, with the Chicago Cubs 6 outs from the World Series. Leon Durham moved to make the play. The ball went under his glove, through his legs, and into right field. Carmelo Martinez scored from second. A 3-2 Cubs lead was gone. Jack Murphy Stadium erupted. San Diego kept hitting, and the Padres won the deciding game of the 1984 National League Championship Series. That era became the Gatorade glove play, one of the most replayed failures in Cubs history. It followed Durham for the rest of his career and long after it. But there is a problem with the story baseball remembers. Durham remained a productive major league hitter for 3 more seasons. As late as 1987, he set a career high with 27 home runs. So what actually ended the career of Leon "Bull" Durham? How much did that ground ball change? And how much has baseball memory asked it to explain? To answer that, the first thing we have to do is stay inside the moment. The Cubs had gone to San Diego with a chance to reach their first World Series since 1945. The 1984 League Championship Series was still best of 5, and Chicago had won the first 2 games. One more victory would do it. Instead, the Padres won games 3 and 4, forcing a deciding 5th game at Jack Murphy Stadium. In the first inning, Durham gave the Cubs exactly the kind of start they needed. Facing Eric Show, he hit a home run. Chicago eventually built a 3-0 lead.
This was not Durham's first important swing of the series. He had also homered in Game 4, temporarily giving the Cubs a 3-2 lead. His overall NLCS numbers were poor, 3 hits in 20 at-bats, but 2 of those hits were home runs in the final 2 games. Even before the era, Durham's series had been a collision of impact and failure. By the bottom of the 6th in Game 5, the Padres had drawn within 1. Alan Wiggins and Tony Gwynn singled. Steve Garvey walked. Sacrifice flies from Greg Nettles and Terry Kennedy reduced Chicago's lead to 3-2. Then came the 7th. The San Diego crowd had watched its team erase most of a 3-run deficit. The concrete seating bowl amplified the noise as Martinez led off against Rick Sutcliffe. 4 pitches missed the strike zone. Martinez took first. Gary Templeton sacrificed him to second. 1 out. The tying run now stood 180 feet from the plate. Tim Flannery came up as a pinch hitter. Before the Cubs had taken the field that inning, Gatorade had been spilled on Durham's glove. That detail would soon become inseparable from everything that followed, although the historical record does not establish that the spill caused the error. Flannery sent a sharp ground ball toward first. ABC broadcaster Don Drysdale reacted as the play unfolded. "Ground ball hit to Durham, right through his legs. Here comes Martinez. We are tied at 3. Had Durham made the play, Chicago would have held a 3-2 lead with 2 outs and Martinez at third.
Instead, the game was tied. Flannery was at first, and there was still only 1 out. The inning continued. Wiggins singled. Gwynn hit a hard ball that skipped beyond second baseman Ryne Sandberg and became a 2-run double. San Diego added another run before the Cubs escaped. The Padres led 6-3. That became the final score. For viewers who lived through that afternoon, the memory may arrive before the details do. Drysdale's voice rising, the white baseball disappearing beneath Durham, and the San Diego crowd releasing years of frustration in one sound. The Cubs had been 6 outs away. By the end of the inning, their season was effectively gone. The error mattered. It tied the game, prolonged the inning, and helped turn the deciding contest towards San Diego. Any honest reconstruction has to give it that weight. The mythology went further. Because of the spilled Gatorade, the play acquired its own name and joined the collection of curses through which Cubs fans tried to explain generations of disappointment. Later, after Bill Buckner's era in the 1986 World Series, The two first basemen became linked by a cruel coincidence. Durham had replaced Buckner at first base in Chicago. Both would become better known for a ground ball that got through than for the careers surrounding it. Even the same degrading joke circulated after both errors, reducing each man to the space between his legs. That is how public memory works when a mistake happens in October.
A career can take years to build, but the image replacing it may require only seconds. Leon Durham's career had begun with a much larger picture. At Woodward High School in Cincinnati, Durham was more than a power-hitting prospect. As a senior in 1976, he was a high school All-American who batted .385 with 16 home runs. He also pitched well enough to compile an 11-3 record. The St. Louis Cardinals selected him with the 15th overall pick in the first round of the 1976 amateur draft. He signed later that month and began the climb through professional baseball. 4 years later, on May 27, 1980, Durham reached the majors against the New York Mets. Busch Stadium in that period was a broad circle of concrete and artificial turf, with the game moving quickly across a surface that could turn an ordinary ground ball into a test of reaction. Durham received 5 at-bats in his debut. He collected his first major league hit and drove in a run. It was one game, but it placed him where a first-round selection was expected to arrive. He was 22 years old, a left-handed hitter and thrower, and athletic enough to play across the outfield before first base became his primary position. His time with the Cardinals did not last long. After the 1980 season, St. Louis traded Durham, Ken Wrights, and a player to be named later to the Cubs for relief ace Bruce Sutter. Ty Waller eventually completed the package going to Chicago. For St. Louis, the return was an established star. For the Cubs, Durham was still becoming one. The strike-shortened 1981 season offered the first sustained look at what Chicago had acquired. Durham hit 10 home runs and drove in 55. He also stole 25 bases, 7th most in the National League. That combination mattered. Durham was not yet confined to the image of a slow, stationary first baseman. He could hit for power, run, and move among outfield positions. The nickname Bull suggested force, but his early game had another dimension. In 1982, everything came together. Durham batted .312, the third highest average in the National League. He hit 22 home runs, drove in 90, and stole 28 bases. His adjusted OPS was 51% better than the league average, also third in the league. Those numbers describe more than a good season. For 6 months, Durham supplied nearly every form of offense the Cubs could ask from a middle-of-the-order hitter. He reached base, hit for power, and created pressure once he got there. He was selected to the All-Star team and won the Silver Slugger Award as a National League outfielder. At 24, he had become one of the league's most complete offensive players. In 1983, Durham made another All-Star team after hitting 12 home runs and driving in 55 during the first half. Then an injury shortly after the break ended his season. The supplied record does not identify the injury, so its larger effect cannot be measured confidently. What can be established is that an ascending season stopped abruptly. When Durham returned in 1984, the Cubs around him had changed. Chicago acquired Bob Dernier and Gary Matthews from Philadelphia. Keith Moreland moved to right field. Durham shifted from the outfield to first base, effectively taking the position held by Buckner. The Cubs then traded Buckner to Boston for Dennis Eckersley. Those moves helped reshape the team. They also put Durham at a position where every routine ground ball would be handled close to the bag, and where one missed play in October would eventually define him. During the regular season, the move worked. Durham hit .279 with 23 home runs and 96 RBI.
The 96 runs he drove in ranked 6th in the National League and became the highest total of his career. In May, he was named the league's Player of the Month. Most important, the Cubs won the National League East. Durham was one of the central hitters on the team that finally returned postseason baseball to Wrigley Field. If you remember the North Side that summer, you may remember more than the standings. Wrigley still had no lights. Afternoon baseball came through open windows, portable radios, and televisions switched on when much of the city was supposed to be working. The manual scoreboard carried scores from around the league, while a Cubs team built through a rush of trades turned an ordinary summer into something Chicago had waited decades to see. That context is part of why the era in San Diego cuts so deeply.
Durham had helped bring the Cubs to the edge of history. Then he became part of the play that kept them from crossing it. But if the era truly broke his career, the evidence should appear afterward. It does not. There is an unexpected piece of evidence from those years that reaches beyond baseball statistics. Durham appears briefly in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He is the first baseman in the sequence where Braves outfielder Claudell Washington sends a foul ball into the stands, and Ferris catches it. For viewers who never studied Durham's numbers, that may be the first place they saw him, part of an ordinary day at Wrigley Field, doing his job while the movie's story unfolds in the seats. The cameo creates an accidental contrast. In one surviving image, Durham is simply a major leaguer at work. In the other, repeated through postseason history, a baseball is passing beneath his glove. Most people understand what it means to have one mistake remembered longer than years of competent work. Durham experienced that on a national stage before today's endless cycle of viral clips and online judgment. But the seasons after San Diego left their own record, and that record is the only fair way to measure what the era actually changed. In 1985, Durham hit 21 home runs and drove in 75. In 1986, he hit 20 more. His RBI total declined to 65, then to 63 in 1987, but his power remained. That final season produced 27 home runs, the most he ever hit.
3 seasons after San Diego, Durham was still a 20-home run player. The postseason mistake may have fixed his reputation, but it had not removed his ability to drive a baseball out of a major league park. This changes the investigation. The question is no longer whether the 1984 era ended Durham's career. The chronology rules out that simple explanation. The meaningful break appears in 1988. Durham opened that season with 3 home runs in 21 games, but he was batting only .219. At the same time, Mark Grace began receiving more playing time at first base. For a veteran, the first signs of displacement are visible before any transaction becomes official. Another name appears in the lineup. Familiar at-bats go to someone else. The position that had belonged to one player begins to belong to 2, and then gradually to the younger man. At Wrigley that spring, the ivy was returning to the outfield walls, while Durham's place in the Cubs' future was disappearing. Grace was 23 years old. Durham was 30. One represented a new answer at first base. The other had been a central part of Chicago's lineup for most of the decade. On May 19, the Cubs made the decision official. They traded Durham to the Cincinnati Reds for pitcher Pat Perry and cash. The source says the deal came amid rumors of drug use. That wording has to be handled carefully. A rumor is evidence of what was being said around a transaction, not proof of why the Cubs made it or of any specific conduct by Durham.
What happened next is firmer. The move sent Durham back to his hometown, but his Cincinnati tenure lasted only 21 games. Wrigley's grass and pinstripes gave way to Riverfront Stadium's artificial turf and the Reds' uniform.
There was no sustained revival. During that season, Durham entered drug and alcohol rehabilitation. The available material does not provide his account of that period. It does not say when his difficulties began, how they affected his preparation or performance, or what happened inside treatment. Those missing pieces matter because timing alone cannot tell us exactly how the slump, the loss of playing time, the trade, and rehabilitation were connected. Still, the sequence is unmistakable. From 1981 through 1987, Durham had been a regular Cubs power hitter. In the first months of 1988, his average fell, his playing time came under pressure, and Chicago traded him. Cincinnati gave him only 21 games before his season moved out of competition and into rehabilitation. That is the first documented point where the career itself began to come apart. The Reds released Durham in November. 3 months later, the organization that had drafted him offered one more opportunity. On February 15, 1989, Durham signed with the St. Louis Cardinals. Nearly 9 years had passed since his major league debut.
In between were 2 all-star selections, a Silver Slugger, a division championship, 7 productive seasons in Chicago, and 1 era that had become more famous than all of them. Now he was back at Busch Stadium, trying to restore a major league career after rehabilitation. The old park still presented the same severe geometry: the circular bowl, the broad stretches of artificial turf, and the red seats rising around a field where the ball could reach a fielder faster than expected. But Durham's circumstances had changed completely. In 1980, St. Louis had introduced a 22-year-old first-round prospect. In 1989, the Cardinals were evaluating a 31-year-old veteran with no secure role. The comeback was interrupted when Durham received a 60-day suspension for failing to comply with the commissioner's drug policy. The source does not specify the exact nature of that non-compliance. It would be irresponsible to add a violation, test result, or motive that the record supplied here does not identify. What the suspension demonstrates is consequence. Durham lost 2 months in a season when every available day mattered. When he did play, there was very little production. Durham went 1 for 18 for the Cardinals. On September 17, 1989, St. Louis played Philadelphia. Durham appeared once at the plate. He did not get a hit. There was no postseason stage, no national broadcast call preserved in the source, and no single defensive image that would be replayed for decades.
The major league career ended with 1 unsuccessful at-bat in a September game. That quiet ending is important. The moment most people associate with Leon Durham happened in front of a roaring San Diego crowd in 1984. The moment his major league career actually stopped came almost 5 years later, after a trade, rehabilitation, a suspension, and an attempted return that produced 1 hit. Durham finished with a .277 career batting average, 147 home runs, 530 RBI, and 992 hits. The last number leaves him 8 short of 1,000, one of baseball's familiar round milestones. It also gives the ending a human scale. After a decade in the majors, the comeback did not last long enough to close even that small statistical distance. Yet Durham did not immediately leave the game. In 1990, he played 36 games for the Salina Spurs in the Class A California League. In 1993, he played for the St. Paul Saints of the Northern League. He also built a long coaching career. Durham spent 17 seasons coaching with the Toledo Mud Hens, Detroit's AAA affiliate. In October 2016, the Tigers named him assistant hitting coach for the 2017 season. That later work changes the shape of the ending. His major league playing career could not be recovered, but
but professional baseball still had a place for what he knew about hitting. The player whose public identity had narrowed to one fielding mistake spent years helping other hitters develop.
He also remained visible in unexpected pieces of baseball culture. Durham played Leon Alexander, a member of the Minnesota Twins, in the film Little Big League. He appears briefly at first base in Ferris Bueller's Day Off during the sequence in which Claudel Washington hits the foul ball that Ferris catches. Anyone who first met Durham through that Wrigley Field scene may have seen only a major leaguer occupying first base in the background. Cubs fans carried another image. Neither glimpse contains the full player. The historical record allows a clear answer to the question that began in San Diego. Durham's error in Game 5 of the 1984 NLCS had enormous competitive and reputational consequences. It allowed the tying run to score, extended the inning, and became the central image of the Cubs' defeat. Because Gatorade had been spilled on his glove, the play gained a name, a curse, and a permanent place in baseball folklore. What the error did not do was end his effectiveness. Durham followed it with 3 consecutive 20-home-run seasons and reached his personal high in 1987. Any claim that the ground ball destroyed his career has to ignore the next 3 years. The stronger evidence begins in 1988. His performance declined. Grace took more of the playing time at first base. Chicago traded him. His brief Cincinnati stay ended in drug and alcohol rehabilitation.
Then the St. Louis comeback was damaged by a 60-day suspension under the commissioner's drug policy and yielded only 1 hit in 18 at-bats. Those are the documented forces surrounding the end: diminished performance, lost opportunity, rehabilitation, disciplinary consequences, and a comeback that did not produce enough to continue. There are limits to how far the record can take us. It does not establish exactly how those factors influenced one another. It does not tell us the precise reason for the Cubs' trade, the private circumstances of Durham's treatment, or his own explanation for why the comeback failed. It certainly does not tell us what he felt when his career became attached to one ground ball. But it tells us enough to separate memory from cause. Leon Durham was a first-round prospect who became a 2-time All-Star. He was a Silver Slugger, a power and speed threat, and a central hitter on the 1984 Cubs. He homered twice in the final 2 games of the NLCS, then made the error that came to represent the entire series. He remained productive for 3 more years, before a far more complicated sequence closed his major league career. Baseball kept the sharpest image: the ball going through his legs, Martinez scoring, and San Diego taking control. The full record keeps something larger. It keeps the 3-1-2 season, the 28 stolen bases, the 96 runs driven in for a division champion, and the 27 home runs 3 years after the mistake that supposedly ruined him. It also keeps the painful final stretch: the lost job, the trade, rehabilitation, suspension, and one last unsuccessful return to St. Louis. The error explains why Leon Durham is remembered as he is. The years that followed explain what actually happened to him. His career deserves to be held in both truths. One play changed the way baseball saw him, while the end came later, more quietly, and for reasons no single replay can contain.